You might feel like you've seen this movie before, but from April 2016, drivers who accumulate more than 12 demerit points will or could be suspended from driving for up to 6 months. And companies and organizations concerned about road safety have rallied behind the demerit system. This is the MoneyMakers. I'm Bruce Whitfield. Tonight, I chat to Japh Chuwe, who is the registrar of the Road Traffic Infringement Agency, about the demerit system. And joining us via Skype, Howard Dembovsky, the national chairman of the Justice Project South Africa. He argues the implementation will only come once the JMPD gets up out of the shade from under the trees and actually does some proper law enforcement rather than simply trapping people on every corner. Japh, this demerit system has been talked about for possibly most of the last decade. What gives you the confidence that in April 2016 you're going to be ready for it?
Oh, well, thank you very much, first of all, for inviting me. We're very confident that we'll be able to roll it out in the upcoming financial year. Let me clarify the point. We're not saying it'll be in April. It's just that the next financial year begins in April 2016. And within that period, that is when we will be able to roll out the whole system of ARTO countrywide. That includes the point demerit system. Indeed, it has been a long time coming, and what gives us the confidence is all that is required to ensure effective implementation. We have dealt with those issues, and one needs to also remember that we made a strategic decision why we needed to implement it on a pilot phase, first of all, and that was in recognition of the complicated nature of the ARTO itself and the intricacies of its involvement with a plethora of stakeholders.
Okay, now ARTO, always controversial, a plethora of stakeholders. It's hardly covered itself in glory. It's what, half a decade old?
Yeah.
And it's taken you this long to get to this point. Why?
Well, indeed, because we had to identify some of the deficiencies in the system, be granted an opportunity to address those and put in the necessary interventions. Among those that were critical is the legislative amendments that needed to take place. And one would also recognize if you're going to amend the Act, is not a short process as when one deals with the regulations. So we've engaged all the stakeholders. We had published it, the ARTO Amendment Bill, for public comment. We had taken it also through the NEDLEC process that involves businesses, labor, social organizations, taking all their inputs, and after having done that, we then crafted the amendment bill that then went through.
Broad brushstrokes, 12 demerit points. Is that an annual system? If I get up to 11 by the 31st of March, do I get back to a score of 0 on the 1st of April every year on April Fool's Day? How does the process work?
No, it's always going to be interactive. At any given point that you reach 12 points, then you are sitting at the threshold. The minute that you go over the 12 points, then your driving license becomes suspended for a period of time that is determined on the basis of how many points over the 12 threshold that you are in. So, for example, if you are sitting at 13 demerit points, your driving license gets suspended for a period of 3 months, which is 3 months for every single point that you are over the threshold.
But surely, I mean, if you get to that threshold over a 5-year period, is that fair? You'll have people who get up to the threshold within 3 months. I understand that they should be suspended immediately, if not have their license withdrawn immediately. Surely there's a refresh. Surely there is some kind of process whereby you can earn back some points.
Absolutely. That's why we say the process is interactive all the time, in that even if you continuously accumulate points, you are also able to lose those points.
Okay.
In this sense, if you go over a 3-month period without committing any traffic violation,
right, got you.
You then are rewarded, in a sense, by the reduction in 1 point for every 3 months that you stay scot-free.
Howard Dembovsky, one of the greatest problems with any system of this kind is the human element. You can get the tech right, you can get the legislation right, you can get absolutely everything right on paper. But when it comes to implementation, and that's one of your big bugbears, that's where it becomes problematic, surely.
Yes, most certainly. And I think that the statement that was made in the beginning that you could have your driving license suspended for up to 6 months is actually incorrect. The fact is that you can have it suspended for 3 months for every single demerit point over the threshold of 12 that you actually incur. So in other words, if you incur 15 demerit points, then you need to understand that your driving license is going to be suspended for 9 months, so you can actually go and take maternity leave in the meantime. However, the big problem that we actually have with this implementation is that nowhere in traffic law in South Africa or any other law in South Africa is the RTIA, the Minister of Transport, or even the CEO of the RTMC given the authority to tell traffic authorities how they should actually enforce the law. And as we've seen from the implementation of the JMPD and the Tshwane Metro Police Department, the vast majority of auto infringement notices that are actually issued are speeding fines. They are camera speeding fines, and they deal with none of the actual moving violations outside of speed infringements. And that is a problem, because whilst it might be true that within a very short time frame of the implementation of the points demerit system, you're going to have a whole lot of driving licenses getting suspended, the fact is that it doesn't really make any difference, because those people will continue to drive their motor vehicles, because the chances of them actually getting stopped by a traffic cop and checked whether they actually have a valid driving license are so remote that it's actually worth taking the risk.
Now, that's a very good point, Dembovsky. I can't tell you when last I was stopped, frankly, because I'm a good law-abiding citizen. But at the same time, you don't know if I've got a license or not.
Well, Howard makes some good points, and this is one of the good value-added services that we provide. You would be aware that in our annual report, we always detail the performance of all the issuing authorities so that you are able to show to them where the majority of law enforcement has been skewed. And we try to ensure that they do not focus on camera-related infringements, because if you only put the focus on camera-related infringements...
How got the numbers? The numbers are predominantly camera-related infringements.
Absolutely, and those numbers are... We are the ones that have actually did the assimilation. We extrapolated those numbers from their own performances, and we give it to them, and we give them that advice that, yes, you might be doing law enforcement, but for more effective kind of enforcement, you need to be able to look at moving violations. And that kind of moving violations, interactively, that's when the law enforcement officer will be able to determine that Japh Chuwe is driving drunk.
But you're not at that stage, and we've had this delay in ARTO for so long. One would have hoped that by now the practical implementation of ARTO would have caught up with the theoretical implementation. But you're not ready.
Well, absolutely. We do recognize the delay that it has taken for us to be able to implement that, but we also recognize that there is great wisdom in moving cautiously so that you are able to come up with a system that will be very effective and efficient in its implementation. Recognizing the impact that it is going to have. Remember, it is all about the increase of road safety, and this is where we make input as the RTIA.
Nobody's going to argue against that at all, Howard Dembovsky, because I mean, you know the numbers better than most in terms of the number of people who are killed and maimed on our roads, mostly due to the idiocy of drunk drivers. And if this system isn't properly implemented by the local authorities, Howard, it's dead in the water, surely.
Well, absolutely. And unfortunately, Jeff, I hate to tell you this, but you sound like a priest at a Satanist convention. The fact is that our traffic law enforcement authorities in this country are widely recognized as focusing purely on revenue. They have got no interest whatsoever in road safety. And in fact, they've got no interest whatsoever in the points demerit system actually coming into play, because it stands to reason that if you are going to be suspending the driving licenses of persons who are habitual offenders, you are going to be reducing the pool of revenue for those law enforcement agencies. And that is why we've seen traffic law enforcement agencies throughout the country, through SALGA, actually making objections to the implementation of a points demerit system in South Africa. Let's forget about the ARTO Act, because, I mean, that has its own problems. But the fact is that it's not in the interests of our traffic law enforcement authorities and the municipalities that run them in South Africa to have greater road safety and, indeed, to reduce the incidence of people infringing on the law or downright breaking the law. Their interest lies wholly and solely in generating revenue, and we are not talking about a couple of rand here. We are talking about billions every single year out of not enforcing the law correctly. And that is the big problem that we have. And until such time as that matter is addressed, ARTO, the National Road Traffic Act, the National Road Traffic Regulations, all of these things are going to have absolutely no effect. We're going to have the minister going and lying to the United Nations every 2 years, saying that we're making progress when we don't have statistics on road deaths in this country. And this situation is just going to continue.
Let's get Japh a chance to respond to that, because you're making some very wide-ranging allegations and suggestions in that. But very few of us would disagree with the broad sentiment of what Howard is saying.
Yes, indeed. Bruce, I would have to start first of all by stating my objection to what Howard is saying, that the minister goes out to lie to the United Nations. That is not true. The emphasis that Howard is placing is on the current challenges that has been experienced in terms of law enforcement. And interactively,
this challenge, I get stopped at 2 o'clock in the morning. I've had a glass of wine too much, and I just go, you know what, there we go, make the problem go away.
Yes.
And the traffic cop makes the problem go away. I notice you're not touching it, which is good. Howard, I've just put money on the table. The point is we have got an inefficient, a corrupt, and a highly corruptible system. Any tech, any computers, any laws you put in place are worthless in the face of that.
But another challenge that we have is these broad generalizations that people make. We do recognize, yes, there are some officers that have taken some bribes, but in the main, the majority of them are good law enforcement officers that are doing the very best that they can to uphold the law. And one needs also to recognize, Howard, one also needs to be able to recognize that it does take two to tango for a law enforcement officer.
But here, we need law enforcement officers. We need the system to be in full working order. Howard Dembovsky, it's not ready, is it?
No,
well, the system is ready. The system,
but no, the system is not ready. Look, last word to Howard. The system is not ready because the people process isn't ready, and the real enforcement, the active enforcement of getting people to drive less like idiots, is not in place.
Well, that's sadly the truth, I'm afraid. And until such time as the Minister of Transport, as the head of transport in South Africa, has the authority to tell traffic law enforcement authorities what to do, the situation is not going to change.
Okay, Japh Chuwe, last word to you then, in terms of the ability of this thing actually to function effectively to keep me and you safer on the roads from the idiots.
Yes, no, absolutely. There's also a number of initiatives that the minister has come up with, and all of us are actively participating in that. I can mention one of them, which is called the implementation of the National Road Traffic Law Enforcement Code, that will come up with
codes, more process, but
but
we need solid law enforcement.
Absolutely, one needs to be able to start with. My colleague at the RTMC, Advocate Msibi, he's responsible for making sure that they coordinate all law enforcement, that you have uniform standard. And there's a lot of progress that jointly, as the family of transport, are making some inroads into that.
5 years
to
ago,
ensure
5 years from now, we'll be having this conversation again. Do you agree?
Yes,
the same
but the difference is in 5 years' time, we would not be talking about whether ARTO is coming or not. We'll be saying how effective the system has been, because we're fully committed. And I can assure you, Bruce, in 5 years, we will all be patting ourselves in the back and say, we as South Africans have finally come up with a system that really does have an impact in terms of saving the lives of our people. And we're looking at it as a constitutional imperative. It's our responsibility to ensure anybody that goes out to enjoy the use and benefit of the road infrastructure network can do so with a semblance of assurance that they leave their departure point and safely arrive at the destination.
From your lips, I really hope you're right, because there are far too many people who simply don't make it to that destination. Japh Chuwe is Registrar of the Road Traffic Infringement Agency, and on Skype, Howard Dembovsky, the National Chairman of the Justice Project South Africa, who's somewhat cynical about whether or not this is going to be effective at all. That's all we have time for this evening. Buckle up, drive safely, and don't have that drink. Good night.